Hello, my name is Rebecca Trout, and I am the director of the National Civic League's All-America City Award Program, as well as our DC office. It is my pleasure to welcome you all to our July Promising Practices webinar. We're really excited to be joined by a fantastic panel, as well as two of my colleagues from our Civic Genius team who are going to tell us all about It's Your America. Before we dive into that, I'd just like to give you a little bit of background for those of you less familiar with League. Our mission is really to advance inclusive civic engagement. We do that by promoting innovations, both in process and structural reform that aim to make democracy and local decision-making more people-centric, so more participatory and effective. And our Center for Democracy Innovations team, as well as our Civic Genius program, help us in that work. We primarily fulfill our mission through three buckets of work. We've got our community assistance, which certainly includes It's Your America, as well as trying to improve public meetings through our Better Public Meetings project. We help with charter reforms, we can do citizen assemblies, and a number of other engagements with communities. Then, of course, we've got our awards and events category. This consists primarily of our flagship program, the All-America City Award, as well as our Democracy Innovations workshops and some other one-off events that we can do. And then last but not least, we've got our research and publication, which is primarily the maintenance and upkeep of the Model City Charter, which communities use, as well as our quarterly journal, the National Civic Review, which is coming out later this week. I would be a very bad director if I didn't make a quick plug for the All-America City Award program. So just want to give a quick shout out to the 10 communities you see here on your screen. They were awarded earlier this summer as the 2025 All-America Cities. So congratulations to them. They really showed us how we can strengthen environmental sustainability in a really inclusive and engaging way that involves the community. We're certainly still celebrating this year's communities, and we'll be visiting many of them in the coming months. But we're, of course, already thinking through to 2026. That's going to be themed around the America's 250th anniversary. So we'll be looking to recognize communities that are strengthening civic health and building trust. So if that sounds like you and or your community, let me know. Would love to talk to you a little bit more about that. We've got an informational flyer on our website right now, and the full application will be available later this fall. And so we use the All-America City Award program to really celebrate local civic engagement and accomplishments. But the purpose of this webinar series is really to share promising practices and democracy innovations from both communities and organizations. And so, of course, we'll be talking about one of those, It's Your America, today. But before we dive in, I just want to give you a couple of housekeeping items. But we ask that everyone remain muted unless instructed otherwise. You can put some questions in the chat. Please introduce yourselves and let us know either your organization or your location. And then we will have some Q&A at the end. You can interact with us through the chat, or we'll enable the raise hand feature for that as well. We're also recording today's webinar, so that recording as well as the slides will be emailed to you under the email address that you registered with. So be on the lookout for that, and don't feel like you need to furiously take notes today. All right, without further ado, I want to give a quick shout out and introduction to today's speakers. Joined by two of my colleagues, Jillian and Ibby will kick us off to talk about, kind of give an overview of It's Your America. Jillian is the Director of Deliberative Democracy here at the National Civic League, as well as the Executive Director of Civic Genius. And Ibby is a Program Manager here at the National Civic League and longtime Civic Genius guru. Then they will hand it off to our panel. Our panel is full of individuals who all have a personal experience and or have seen It's Your America in action. We're joined by Dr. Steve Woodard, City Council member of Mount Lake Terrace, Washington, and brand new grandfather, as well as Katie Terry, who is the Executive Director of the Henry M. Jackson Foundation, and last but not least, Tremaine Harris, who's the Youth Leadership Coordinator with the City of Rochester, New York. All right, well, we're in for a great webinar, and now I'm going to hand it over to Jillian, who's going to get us started with a quick Mentimeter poll.
All right. Thank you so much, Rebecca. Good morning and good afternoon, everybody, depending on your time zone. I'm Jillian Youngblood, and it's great to be here with all of you today. We're going to start with a quick poll. You can, if you've used Mentimeter before, you'll know you can just scan that QR code, or you can always go to menti.com and enter those 8 numbers. So I'll let everybody get in there. Give 1 second for folks to get into Mentimeter. Don't worry, you don't have to go into a breakout room and talk to strangers. It's just a poll. I'll just ask a first question. I suspect I know the answer to this question, but who here has ever been to any kind of public meeting? A town hall, a school board meeting, a city council study session? This seems to me like a town hall going crowd. Okay, but not everybody. Give everybody a couple minutes or a couple seconds to answer that. So any kind of public meeting where there was any kind of government running it, government or elected official. Okay, so for those, so a lot of folks have been to town halls. So 93% of us, or to other public meetings. Would you say that these public meetings are venues for thoughtful exchanges of ideas and discourse rooted in mutual respect? We'll see if that no stays at 100%. Okay, some people have had good experiences. This is good. A lot of Okay, so a little more frustration than satisfaction, I think it's fair to say. And I'll just ask one more question. Would you say that the crowd at these public meetings you've been to was representative of your community? Little bit yes, mostly no. That tracks in my experience. So I think the trends here are pretty clear. Why is this the case? So I think 2 reasons. First of all, the model that we have for our public meetings is outdated. Secondly, polarization is making us crazy. So let's start with the model. And we can go to the next slide. Beautiful. So the traditional town hall is a place where you can make your voice heard, meaning that usually you can read your index card for 3 minutes and then sit down. It's not really designed for dialogue. It's not really designed for problem solving. These forums are designed for question and answer, or thank you, next. So they can be useful. People deserve an opportunity to go say what they need to say to their government officials, but this model is lacking in a lot of ways. So there's also then this question of who's in the room, and it's something like 85, maybe more percent of people said the public meetings they've been to are not representative. So I think what I've seen, I'm a former Capitol Hill staffer. I worked for Mayor Bloomberg in New York City and have run, I don't know, a million billion different kinds of public meetings. The people I typically see at these are your kind of professional citizens. So like your Rotary Club folks, your League of Women Voters folks. They're fabulous. They show up to all of these things. Elected officials are used to hearing from them. You'll get people who have a specific interest. So maybe you are a business owner and you're going to be affected by a zoning change. You show up at the town hall. That makes sense. Get a lot of lobbyists and government affairs folks. I don't think that lobbyists and government affairs folks should not be coming to public meetings. I think they play an important role, but they're very plugged in. They know what's going on. They're coming to talk about or learn about something specific. Or you get people with, we'll just say, very strong views. And that can really run the gamut. So sometimes these are people who want to shut the forum down. Sometimes folks come with strong views, and that's great. But that's really who I see at public meetings. So why isn't everybody else showing up? I'll just name a few of the 5,000 reasons I think people don't always show up. I can imagine that you are working multiple jobs and you have kids and you're taking care of your elderly mom. Maybe you have never seen politics work and it doesn't really seem worth your time to show up. Maybe you don't see the complexity of your worldview represented in the discourse. Maybe you don't think you know enough to participate fully. You're like, I don't have time. I don't even know what the comprehensive plan is, and I don't have time to read the whole thing before this meeting. Maybe you just don't feel comfortable taking that bus you would need to take at night, so you're not going to go. A lot of different reasons. I'm sure you can fill in your reasons that maybe you haven't participated. I will say that I do this for a living, and I go to many fewer of these things than I would expect of myself. I want to be really clear that I'm not blaming anyone for the shortcomings of town halls. Governments tell all of us at the League consistently that they actually really do want to have in-depth conversations with their constituents, and they know that they're not hearing from all segments of their constituents, and they are frustrated by that. So a lot of governments are looking for ways to get more folks involved, and they don't quite know how to do it. Individuals tell me, probably tell a lot of you, some version of, I know I should be more involved. I actually would like to be more involved, but to tell you the truth, I went to a city council meeting once and it felt like the council had already made up their minds. They had to check a box that said the public gave input, and then they just did whatever they were going to do before. Um, and I think, in other words, people are often making a rational decision not to participate. Now let's talk about the vibes. They are off. This is a chart that shows what we'll call toxic polarization. Experts would call this affective polarization over time. So you can see, I'll just walk you through these three lines really quickly. This green line, the in-party feeling, this is how do I feel about people who are aligned with me ideologically or are say, registered in the same political party as me. So it's gone up, it's gone down. There's been some variation over time, but not a massive change there. This purple line shows us the out party feeling. So how do I feel about people who do not agree with me ideologically? Probably to no one's surprise. This started at a kind of median level and has gone down and down and down. And then something that is maybe most worrisome is this gray line showing that affective toxic polarization. This means not just you think this on immigration, I think that, we disagree, and I find that frustrating. I don't really want to talk to you about this anymore. Affective polarization is I think this and you think that, and I hate you. That is the wrong position, and we are enemies now. That's gone way up. This stops at 2020. I can tell you that it has continued to go up since then. So this kind of toxic polarization has gotten a lot worse over the last 50 years. And as we all know, every public space is now a politicized space. That could be a congressional town hall where maybe you'd expect to see that. It could be Target during Pride Month. It feels like nowhere is safe from kind of toxic politics. At the same time, political extremism is on the rise. Last year, we saw a 14% increase in reported threats against local elected officials or local government officials. And that follows an even larger increase in the previous year. The study that has been tracking that found that many officials were actually more wary of taking on complex or controversial issues in their work. Actually, we can go to the next slide. And on the part of, so I think that's kind of concerning that what this is telling us is that elected officials, basically the threats are working. This environment is making elected officials scared of taking on issues that are difficult and really important. And on the part of constituents, that's also not really an environment that most people want to be in. So the good news is that there is a whole menu of democracy innovations that can address these challenges. That includes deliberative approaches like citizens' assemblies. If you're not familiar with citizens' assemblies, this is a global model of decision making where a government convenes a random representative group of residents to deliberate on an issue and make recommendations to address it. At the outset of a citizens' assembly process, the government commits to formally considering and publicly responding to those recommendations, and they'll very often implement them whether in whole or in part. So it's a collaborative process where the government is not fully on the hook, but they are really bought in, and the expectation is that they are going to take these recommendations seriously. Some of you may also be familiar with the National Civic League's Better Public Meetings work, which introduces a whole slate of design They are both interventions and innovations, innovative interventions, I'll say. So, for example, people might be working together in small groups instead of doing that 3 minutes at the mic, where there is a high opportunity for grandstanding. People can be using real-time polling to give input, just like we did at the beginning of this webinar. You're reducing opportunities for divisive arguments, the bad kind of arguments to break out, and you generally are having higher quality interactions between governments and residents. Innovations like this get rave reviews. So both elected officials, government officials, and members of the public report very high levels of satisfaction with deliberative approaches when they have the chance to experience them. But when we tell people that these tools really work, they don't always believe us. Not everybody has the wherewithal to sit through this whole lecture. So that's why we created It's Your America. It's Your America is designed to show this story rather than to tell it. It's designed to give people a glimpse of what is possible with deliberative democracy. So, It's Your America is a deliberative democracy workshop. They run anywhere from about 2 to 3 hours, where communities learn tools for problem solving and experience for themselves that working together across differences is both possible and it is satisfying. They like it. We want to do more of it. We choose one issue. We've done everything from policing and public safety to misinformation and free speech to housing and growth. So, big, difficult issues, the kinds of things people like to get in fights about at town halls. And we do some high level education about whatever issue it is that we're tackling. And that's kind of focused on what are the core tensions of this issue? What makes it hard to solve? We know that if we give people a long packet of, a bunch of Atlantic articles about housing in advance, that people are not necessarily going to read those. So we don't assume that people are coming in with a lot of prior knowledge. We do know that people are coming in with their own experiences of this issue. So folks come in knowing things, and then we try to level set what's difficult about this issue. Where do we expect that folks in this room will have some disagreements? People in an It's Your America are working together in small groups. We call them teams. And we take them through a series of exercises that enables each team to find some kind of common ground on the issue. People also learn about some of those deliberative tools that I mentioned earlier, and they start to see how these kinds of exercises we're doing can help us address some real world challenges. We do a lot. This is just a kind of visualization of what happens in an It's Your America. I'll say that we do a lot of community outreach to get folks in the room, often in partnership with local governments. It's Your America really works best when the room reflects the lives of the community. So we spend a lot of time talking with who I'll call the usual suspects, your civic groups, your advocacy organizations, your political science professors who give their students extra credit for attending. Thank you. We love that. But also with the hundreds of other places where you find most people. So PTAs, social service organizations that are maybe providing direct services to people, houses of worship, fitness groups for new moms, you name it. Wherever people are, we want to make sure that they know this is happening and it's a different kind of space than the one they're used to. So we don't get perfect representation at an It's Your America, but we get a nice diverse room that brings together people who would typically not be talking about immigration or whatever with one another. I would say we get probably 75 to 80% of where I would like to be in terms of real representation. And I would think about that broadly as gender, race, ethnicity, income, political ideology, and geography of the community, so different neighborhoods. So we get a really nice mix of community leaders, of activists, of just regular folks who heard about this on the radio, and then also a lot of people in government, and that's both staff and elected officials. This process is rooted in the brain and behavioral science of learning and conflict, which is why we designed it with a Hollywood reality show producer. You might not have expected a slide about science to have a bunch of beach balls, but Who understands conflict better than reality TV? So we know that when your emotions are engaged, you are more engaged. We know that if your psychological experience is positive, you're more likely to come back. And we also know that the flip side is true. If you're not emotionally engaged, you're not going to retain information in the same way. And there's a lot of evidence that if you have, this is not a surprise, right? If you have a bad experience, you're probably not going to come back. So that first experience, especially for people who have not been engaged in the past, is highly determinative of what their engagement will be like in the future. So we worked with this reality show producer to help us create some games that really get people out of their heads, make them want to ask questions, make them want to understand another perspective. I think where a town hall might provide that environment might kind of prime you to fight or to have your guard up. IYA, It's Your America, creates an environment where you're really primed to let your guard down, to listen, and to be thoughtful about how you express yourself. And I can just say, Ibby will tell me if you have a different opinion, but as a staffer, I have thrown people out of town halls. We've never had to throw anyone out of an It's Your America, which now that I've said that on a webinar, I'm sure, knock on wood. The goal here is not that everyone agrees on everything. That would be crazy, and I don't actually think is a worthy goal. The goal isn't to change anyone's mind, although that does happen sometimes. The goal is really to get people good information, to help them build a rapport, build trust, and lay down their arms so that they can have a productive conversation. Across ideology, race, income, education, gender, you name it, people inevitably have more common ground than they realize. That's not just my opinion, that's borne out by a whole body of research. And this realization feels so good. It comes as such a relief in this high volume political environment that people really want more. Okay, so it's a workshop. What comes next? What is the point of all of this? What comes next really varies from community to community, and that is part of the goal. So, in several cities and counties where we have run It's Your America workshops, elected officials have reached out asking how they can organize a citizens assembly. They've said, I'm sold, I heard about it, how do we do it? And we actually are in conversation with a number of local governments right now about standing up those citizens assemblies in different cities and currently one county. In some other communities, governments will say, okay, we would really love to experiment with some of the deliberative techniques that we just learned about. And we'll then work with those governments to integrate some of these exercises into the public engagement that they're already doing. So that can mean improving or innovating on the ways that they are doing their school board meetings, their town halls, et cetera. So a little bit of a slower approach to getting into the maximalist kind of deliberative citizens assembly. We also will often just run more of these. So I just talked with a city, I'll say a city in the Southeast recently who said, I think we actually just need to do a few more It's Your America workshops at this point. She said, I want to work toward doing some of these more formal deliberative models in our community, but the political animosity here right now is just so high that we need to turn the volume down before we get there. So some communities use It's Your America as a way of inviting more people in and starting to put people on the same time, on the same team if they're in a very contentious environment. Governments are not the only ones who initiate conversations with us. We hear from a lot of individuals who want to know what's next and they want to start to understand how they can stand up these deliberative interventions in their own communities. So we've actually just started convening people online who have attended in It's Your America, or maybe they registered and couldn't make it, but bringing those people together so they can learn more deeply about deliberation and about democratic innovations and how those might fit into their communities. So I'm going to stop monologuing for a second and introduce you to my colleague, Ibby Bazian. Ibby has helped run It's Your America workshops from upstate New York to Honolulu and a whole bunch of places in between. We have not been invited back to Honolulu, so we need to follow up with them. And together, we're going to give you a little taste of what It's Your America is all about. So, Ibby, I'll hand it over to you.
Yeah, thank you so much. Okay, so don't do anything with that yet. So we typically travel around with a bunch of board games, puzzle, or not puzzles, buzzers, beach balls. If you've been to an IYA in the Pacific Northwest, you might recognize a plush sockeye salmon that Jillian should be holding right now.
So
She's
many
holding it.
salmon. We drove
Uh,
up the price of these salmon on Amazon.
very
They're
much so.
game
Actually
boards.
embarrassing. But considering we're online, we couldn't mail all the toys to all of y'all. We're going to use Mentimeter again. So if you wouldn't mind pulling your phones back out, it should be the same QR code and everything. So nothing should have changed. It'll just be continuation of slides. I see I have 39 people in the room right now. So what we're going to do is essentially a simulation of the game board activity that we do towards the end of our workshop. So this typically comes about 2.5 hours after deliberations have occurred. So we're pretty deep into the mix of policy recommendations, discussions, things that you wouldn't normally think about. So the goal of this game particularly is for all the teams and the small groups to start finalizing a few policy recommendations that they can all get behind. You'll notice on the bottom row that it's not necessarily an up-down vote. We're not really interested in up-down votes. We want to see where people are moving on throughout the scale. So the bottom's like really not feeling it, all the way to the top of loving it. For the purposes of this today, we're gonna all be one giant team. We're gonna see how that goes. I'm faithful that we can do this well. Okay, so let's imagine that our topic is housing. We're going to start with one policy idea. In an actual workshop, like I mentioned, you're going to be generating your own policy ideas. But to make this work online, I'll just throw one out there. Forewarning, I'm not advocating for this. I'm not advocating for anything outside of deliberation. This is just an exercise, so bear with me. I'll propose that I think we should make housing more affordable by rezoning single family lots to allow higher density housing. So making higher housing affordability through rezoning single family lots to allow higher density housing. So I'm going to open up the Menti real quick. I think should be open. Let me know where you are on that proposal. We can kind of go from there.
And we would be, in real life, we would be using one of these giant game boards.
Yeah, there's little ponds and everything. It's very fun.
All right, so we're kind of across the board on this. So I'll jump in and you can keep voting. By all means, keep voting. So I'll jump in as someone sitting at Ibby's metaphorical table. I've said, this seems like a really big change to my neighborhood.
And then I'd jump back in. I'd be asking, like, what are your main concerns about this?
So you're asking a good question instead of like, why don't you like this? If he's asking a really good question, like, okay, what are your main concerns? So I'll say, first off, I am worried about parking. I want to know where all of these people are going to park if we're quadrupling the number of people who might live in my neighborhood.
I hear that. I think parking is important. So would you potentially support this idea if we integrated and guaranteed parking for the developments?
Yeah, I think if parking were guaranteed for everybody and like my guests could still come visit me and they wouldn't have trouble parking, that would help.
Cool. So let's see. So if we find a way to guarantee parking for all the residents, this is for everybody, would you get any closer to supporting this proposal? It's a tongue twister. You can go ahead and fill in this poll. So if we're guaranteeing parking, does that move anyone who was in the or I'm getting their range over to the other side? Seen some movement.
And all over. Ups and pluses and minuses to more parking, I know, so it's a complex one. So I'll say, all right, I think I'm getting there. I feel better about the parking. I appreciate that you took that seriously. Um, I guess I'm also wondering just how much development you're really angling for here. Like, is the idea to make this neighborhood more urban? Are we going to have are you envisioning stores and apartment buildings, that kind of thing?
Yeah, fair question. I think that would be awesome, personally.
Oh, okay. Well, I've lived here my whole life. And I really like the neighborhood how it is. It's quiet. I know all my neighbors.
Yeah, Okay, so what if we, instead of having a bunch of new development in that kind of sense, what if we capped it at duplexes, triplexes, fourplexes? So basically capping it at 4 units per lot, just so we can increase that density a little bit.
Okay, so no tall apartment towers.
And then we're going to move y'all over to round 3 over here. Let me know what y'all think. No apartment towers, capping it at fourplex, and guaranteed parking.
In this fictional neighborhood where we all live together.
Yes.
So you can kind of see this is a conversation that if you have it in a different format, can go off the rails immediately. People, if you own a single family home and you've lived there your whole life and somebody comes and says your neighborhood's about to change, and it's, like you're the problem for not immediately being on board with this, that feels like a threat. When you feel threatened, you're going to respond as if you are threatened. The tension in these kinds of conversations can ratchet up really quickly. And again, if you've been to public meetings at the local level, I think zoning is one of the main issues where you see this dynamic play out over and over and over again. You might have neighborhood groups and then your YIMBY groups. I've seen this recently, show up in numbers. And I'm not saying that people don't have the right to do that, but the conversation very quickly is like, what are we gonna do with this room full of angry people? And there's not an opportunity to ask kind of good leading questions like, what are your main concerns? What makes you feel that way? To say things like, yeah, I actually totally get that. Or no, oh, that's actually not what I meant, which is a really important one. You don't get an opportunity to do that in a traditional setting. In a deliberative setting, you do. And something that we see happen all the time is that two people who are just fundamentally on different sides of an issue will realize in the course of the conversation that even though they're not going to agree on this, they're actually both really angry or really supportive about something that is related or tangential. And now they're friends. Now they're on the same team. And that changes the kind of conversation that they're having about the original issue. So it's really, really fascinating to see people, again, sometimes change their minds, but just see people kind of hugging it out afterwards. It's a really, as I said, positive emotional and psychological experience. And that is not typically what you get in these kinds of public settings. So you can imagine that Ibby and I have different political affiliations. Maybe he has a master's degree and I have a college degree or a high school degree. I'm older than him, if you can believe it. But throughout this workshop, we've learned to ask each other those really good questions. We've spent some time getting to know each other. And we can now see each other as humans instead of social media avatars. So I would love to move over to our panel, and we have 3 panelists with us today who are all community leaders in different capacities. They have all been to an It's Your America workshop, and I'm delighted to welcome Tremaine Harris, Dr. Steve Woodard, and Katie Terry. And they will all pop on. There we go. Everyone has popped. So I just would love to start by asking for your reflections from all 3 of you. What has your experience been, either personally or professionally, with public engagement? And Steve, since you are a sitting city council member, I'll start with you.
Oh, thank you. Appreciate that. Wonderful to meet everybody. Thank you for joining us this morning, first and foremost, or this afternoon, depending on where you are in the world. Yes, I am a sitting city council member. So this is what I do day in and day out on some levels. But I also work for a nonprofit as an executive here in Washington State, the Seattle area, Snohomish County specifically, Volunteers of America, Western Washington, and I'm in community engagement there, which is to say that I find myself in a lot of forums, putting them on as well as attending, as well as being on stages like this one. So in that regard, pretty much every day I'm in some type of deliberation or avoiding some type of deliberation. I would say that as well. So that would be my introduction.
And have you been like, how does it go when you are when you're on the city council side and folks show up to a public meeting? Can you just talk a little bit about what you think the challenges are in those environments, or what goes well and what do you think can be improved?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll just focus solely on being on the dais or at the study table. So we have intentionally in my council made sure that we get public comment, and that's at best what it is. It's set up to where you either have 3 or 5 minutes. You don't know which one it is. Sometimes we don't know which one it is. And it matters. If there's many of you who come, which quite frankly doesn't happen very often, but when it happens, we'll cut the time in half. So maybe you came in thinking you're getting 5, and now I'm telling you get 2.5. All of this is just to point out this is not about really engaging with you. It's hearing what's on your mind, which is not the same from where I'm sitting, because usually you're a lot more thoughtful when you're trying to get a point across as opposed to saying, this is what I'm thinking about. So it is structurally not set up for you to feel like you should be going any further. And then we add this new element, this new ripple effect, which is we literally don't respond to you. So you've shared whatever it is, no matter what the topic is, and we effectively are looking at you, or some of our council mates are looking at other things because we don't always stare at each other when we're talking. But again, we're not even setting up an environment that's inviting for you. And that's actually the structure, I think, of just about every council across this country. So I don't think I'm telling on Mount Lake Terrace. I'm telling you this is how the structure is set up. And then you relay that to the next person. We do our best to remind you that we don't respond to you. We are listening, I promise. And we might respond a week later, but it's not going to be in the moment, which is what you're used to in a dialogue. So that would be my answer.
And Tremaine, what about you? So you work with youth in Rochester, New York. So you're with the public all the time. What has your experience been like with public engagement, whether just as a constituent or in your professional capacity?
Thanks for the question. For the professional part of it, it's surveys, it's town halls. But the key thing is to make sure that you're deliberate in looking for what you want and what you want from the community. So you have to be very clear on what that is. And if you're doing a survey on, for example, we've done surveys on our outdoor Bill of Rights, which was passed by City Council. And it's asking those questions. What about nature do we need to improve on? Is there anything that from your perspective that we need to do better? So with that, before you even get there, for example, the youth reached out to over 100 organizations, nature organizations, got information from them, helped structure the questions so that we're not just putting out a question about nature that isn't relevant to the community. So throughout all that process is getting that information and making sure that the data that we get from that is very intentional. So it's that community engagement is very important. And what It's Your America, it's a great platform to jumpstart that and to have that backing behind it.
Yeah, and thank you. I think you make a good point, which is, and maybe this seems pretty elementary, but really being specific about the topic is so critical because all of these issues have a lot of different spokes,
Yeah.
and things can really turn into other topics very quickly. And I think you guys in Rochester have done a really good job of innovating on the way that you just ask the questions, which not every local government has done. Katie, I would love to hear about your experience with public meetings and public input.
Sure. So I'm currently the executive director at the Henry M. Jackson Foundation, but my previous role was also in the Seattle area and in King County, where Seattle's located. I'm the former parks director, and so many public meetings, many town halls, and both as a participant in local parks as well as going to public meetings. Those public meetings are meant to be hearing from people. But again, you're hearing about every potential issue that they could be having or interested in the county. And the portion that you're actually hearing about with the parks, it is again kind of as you call it, Jillian, the kind of professional citizen that tends to show up. And if that's really the questions that you're asked or the concerns that people have, whether that's representative of where the whole community is coming or just a particular constituency group that tunes into those public meetings, you're never quite sure. And it does tend to be those platforms. So having seen public meetings that I've attended just as a participant where, say you have a park and people want to know, could you have gardening there? Is there going to be recreation there? And, you know, going through a public meeting where only an hour and a half in, that somebody who's organizing it saying, we're just trying to get a gist of what people are interested in. This isn't a vote for which one. You can have multiple uses in a park. That, you know, in the meantime, you've had an hour and a half where people feel like, you know, there were tears, they were crying because they cared so much about what they wanted, not even realizing that there could be, you know, multiple things accomplished. And so I think just usually those are kind of, here's my vote, rather than let's have a discussion.
Yeah, that tracks. Thank you. So you've all been to an It's Your America workshop, I think on different issues in different locations. And I'm curious if there are components or elements of It's Your America that you really appreciated or you want to see more of, or you think could address some of the shortcomings of public input that you've experienced. And I'll open that up to whoever wants to take it first.
Yeah. I'll dive in, not to set a pattern here, but since my mic is already on, I will say the first thing that I genuinely appreciated, and so our workshop was in the evening. I think that matters after a very long day, not near my home, meaning that you had to be intentional about it. And there was a lot going on that particular meeting, so you really made a conscious decision to come in. That said, I came into that room to watch, and there was no watching. And I loved that because I was too tired to just immediately want to engage. But the way that the system is set up, the games are set up, there's no way you can sit on the side. So it literally invited you in. And I remember my deputy city manager was coming potentially up from Seattle. And I said, well, you know, we're in about an hour already, so you can catch up. I did believe that it wasn't exclusionary in that immediately get involved. But you're not going to be able to watch from the side. So if you're exhausted already on the drive, you probably don't want to finish that drive out. But I was sincere about that because it was so engaging that it immediately pulled me in. And that's hard to envision. I've been to a lot of town halls where, yeah, you want to sit along the wall and see who's in the room first, you know, before you start saying what's on your heart. Or in your heart, depending on your perspective. But that said, the space was inviting, and I think that was the tone from the beginning. And maybe it was just because you came in and there were so many ways to engage just on the table itself to kind of put you at ease. So that would be my initial thought, and I'll share some others and make some room for other folks.
Great.
Yeah, it was a great experience. The youth loved it. And ours, it was at the library, Rondell Library in Rochester, and the atmosphere was comfortable. So I feel anytime that you're doing something like It's Your America platform, it should be a comfortable environment where everyone is on the same level, regardless of age, economic status. And we had youth at different tables, so spread out. So it wasn't just a table of youth or a table of adults. It was youth ingrained in there, police officers ingrained, just the whole community ingrained in different tables, which is a representation of the community. And having that type of platform really allowed everyone's voice to be heard. And again, it didn't matter where you come from. It's about what's the issue for you and whether that issue is the same in your community or is it different. But it allowed you to see other people's perspective in real time, in a organized, deliberate way. And it brought people together. Not everyone came up with their policy. Our table did, but it also looked at, you know, why didn't your table come up with the solution? So it really helps you dive into what that, again, that deliberate question or deliverable that you need out of that policy.
And just to build on what Tremaine said, everyone had to speak and had to listen to the other people at their table. And many of the tables had these very generative conversations to come up with policies. And even those tables who didn't, I was at one where there was actually a fair amount of contention, but the contention at our table didn't impact the entire meeting for everyone. And that was also a really powerful model.
That's a great point. The spill, you have contained discord sometimes can preserve the conversation for everybody else. Steve and Tremaine, you both have roles in government, and Steve, I know you have a dual role, including one outside of government as well. In your roles in government, I'm curious if you could imagine weaving in some of the things that you've experienced at It's Your America into your work.
I would say we already do it. We've done it without the It's Your America model. Just the fact that everybody in the community came together, that's something different. Usually it's a town hall, either the mayor speaking or a speaker speaking about something, and whether it's a budget town hall, doing it in this format takes away everyone biases in a way, because it centers you into doing something. So taking that model, and especially with the youth are all, the Mayor's Youth Advisory Council is always doing work around what can we do better, how can we get youth voice out there more, but now it's how do you get the community voice out there more. So this will be a great opportunity to weave that in and have the community really have a stake in saying that I was a part of helping create this policy. I was a part of changing and making changes in my own community, which is something that we definitely need. And not everyone has the answer, but creating that synergy around It's Your America model will definitely help Rochester propel us into the future, but I'm sure it will help all communities be able to center that work that we're going to be doing.
That's beautiful. Yeah, and I would echo similarly that although I was indicting our public comment during our official meetings, we have made a concerted effort to make sure that we're gathering feedback. And I can definitely see where It's Your America fits into that. I won't say that we've been using it per se, but again, my deputy city manager, she was coming up to get tips. I'm not sure if she's made other ones. That said, one of the first things that we've done, going back to this idea of being comfortable, we've broken this idea that everything should happen in City Hall. So when we were doing, or you used as an example, the plan, what was it, Vision 2050, I think right now, 2040, gathering our feedback, we went into the community and I think used a lot of these principles, one of which I think goes unacknowledged, although you did it here very smoothly, which is just using common language. People can relate to it. I'm feeling it. I love it. Nah. Meh. I mean, all these things are coded as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or top to bottom. Like, it just doesn't put it in language that's accessible, which I think has pushed us to think about accessibility. We do things now in multiple languages, so I'd be curious to see how It's Your America fits in a different language. Run entirely that way, not just in English. I think it would work very well, culturally speaking. But that said, I also see how you could use this for my departments. Annually we have a budget, of course, but our departments are running day to day. And finding common ground, I think, would be a way that you could use this in their actual work, because whether we want to accept it or not, we are in limited resources, which by definition puts you in contention, especially if you're running a department and everybody thinks the work that they do is the one that makes the city run, and they're accurate, right? They need all of that. But to find that common ground, so you're not bringing in a set of competing ideas. Instead, perhaps you've heard some commonality and now you can all find a bridge together to bring your budget needs forward. That clearly helps the city in the long run and our residents. So in that regard, for me, as I was in the session, I was looking for ways where where is it contentious that this could break that down so we could at least have a conversation? I was in higher ed where contention was the meal of the day. So in that regard, it'd be interesting to even see how that would work in higher ed. I definitely could see how play would be helpful. Everything is always so serious, and it is, but it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be joyful. Or that it shouldn't be a learning process in addition to what it is we're trying to achieve, which is what I felt like was happening that night. We were, as you said, you were dropping in knowledge while we were also playing these games, but we are also learning about each other. And to me, those were all solid wins across the board that I could see in any setting, but in particular in trying to get input from your residents who many times don't feel like you represent them, even though they voted for you, right? They're like, oh, you're doing that work over there. It's like, no, this work is inside your home. Come be a part of this. So in that regard, it's like I felt like the accessible language, the environment itself, and then just the practical nature of the work we do, it's set up to be contentious. This could break that down.
Amazing. Katie, I have just one more quick question for you, and then would love to open it up to questions from the audience. So Katie runs the Henry M. Jackson Foundation, which has this really incredible founding story inspired by legendary former Senator Scoop Jackson, who you might be familiar with. And Senator Jackson was really known as this kind of reach across the aisle legislator who feels like he's from a bygone era now. And I'm just curious, as a foundation, how you see programs like It's Your America aligning with your work.
Well, it very much does. We're inspired by Senator Jackson, who was known for finding common ground, listening to constituents, listening to people who had different views than his to make his policy better, and really having results-oriented policy. And one of the reasons why we've been getting involved in what kind of measures we can take towards improving civic health is because polarization we see just upending all of that. And deliberative democracy is something that we see as being really promising. And that's why we wanted to help fund local It's Your America workshops to bring that model and try out that model in Washington State. And it really ties back to these Jackson values of being open and pragmatic and having a vision towards the long term.
Great. We have some time for questions. Feel free to drop those in the chat. And as you do that, I'll just expand on one thing that Tremaine mentioned, the topic for the Rochester workshop, and please, questions. The topic for the Rochester workshop was policing and public safety. And we had the deputy police chief there who brought, I think, 3 officers with him. We had a number of young people. We had a number of people who had had various kinds of interactions with law enforcement. There was a very high-profile police killing in Rochester a couple of years ago. This is, I think, an issue that has remained pretty tense in the community. And it was really interesting to see the kinds of conversations that were happening with the police officers, with folks in the community. And it's not like Rochester does no outreach on this topic. Like I think the police department does coffee with they have community outreach officers as most police departments do. And I think still the quality of interaction that I saw between law enforcement and community members was a little bit more authentic than even what I've seen in some of those other environments, which are all still very good, and I'm glad that communities do them. So I'm just going through some questions. This is a great question. How can you have more participation when there's so much opposition to hold public discourse? I'm not sure if that's a question about communities or elected officials who are not holding any kinds of public forums, but that's certainly something that we are seeing. And I know we're seeing that at the federal level. We're also seeing that to a lesser extent at the local level. And there are all kinds of reasons, I think, that elected officials are declining to hold public forums. For some number of those elected officials, they have told us that they would like to, but they're actually really worried about this dynamic. In some cases, elected officials feel physically unsafe. They're worried about their own safety and the safety of their staff. They often feel like they are not productive, and they get stuck in this really terrible spot where they want to do public outreach, and they've been doing public outreach, and it's been completely unproductive. The same people show up every time. Maybe they have one contingent who's really angry, and it's just like they sign up to get yelled at by the same people for an hour once a month. So they've pulled back on their public engagement. And that's exactly what we don't want to see is elected officials who would be doing engagement who now aren't doing it. So I think that some of these other models can be really useful. And It's Your America, I think, is a way of opening up that discussion. And then some of these other deliberative interventions that you can include in the public engagement you already do, some of the better public meeting stuff, I think is really useful there. And Ibby and Rebecca, you probably are seeing more questions than I have because I've been talking. So feel free to grab any that sound really interesting. Someone asked about follow-up and accountability. We hear from a lot of people who have attended generative feedback sessions but don't see their input reflected. This is such a good question. So I'll say that It's Your America is not the follow-up feedback part of public input. It's kind of the welcoming everybody in, bringing more people to the table. I have heard from a lot of communities, especially on very difficult emotional issues, that they are kind of tired of being asked for their opinion on things. I'll use policing as another example. I've heard from a number of communities that have said, like, I don't know how many surveys I have filled out about this. I can tell you again what I think, needs to happen with policing in my neighborhood or in my community. When are you going to do something about it? So obviously the gathering of input is really important, but I do think that needs to be paired with more formal things. It doesn't have to be a citizens assembly, but I'll use that as the example where you really do have something with teeth, where you have government officials who have said, we're asking the community, we are planning to make policy changes, and we're going to seriously consider what recommendations the community comes up with. So I absolutely agree that a lot of people, I think, don't participate because they don't always see that it's worth it. They don't always see that follow-up. And I'll just, Ibby, if I could ask for your help with grabbing a great question, that would be wonderful.
Trying to find it. My chat box actually disappeared. I'm trying to find out where my chat box went.
Okay, just give me a hot second and I will go through all of these great questions. Yes, I'm happy to share more information about the template, and I'll actually, if it's okay, I'll just send that information in an email after this because I can give a lot more detail there. What is the process and details for this training? Is it a core group trained? Oh, is a core group trained a prerequisite for bringing it to the city? So we have toyed with the idea of training cities to do these, and so far have really just been doing them ourselves. Because we have so much experience with navigating all of the different dynamics that come up. So right now, our team travels to deliver these workshops, which means that cities don't need to have any particular kind of expertise or infrastructure. And I think we have maybe time for one more question.
Sorry, Julian, my Zoom was messing up on me, but one of the questions that I was seeing a couple kind of iterations is if you could give a little bit of an overview on kind of like the overall format of it, and like maybe a like brief outline of like the steps.
Sure. Yeah. And again, we'll send that absolutely after this. But folks come in, ideally, these last 3 hours. Sometimes we condense to 2.5. We've done them in 2 hours, which I think is a little bit tight. So for the sake of argument, we'll say that they are 3 hours. Folks come in, and as they have registered in advance, so we know who's coming. There is a registration table when they walk in, and the people at the registration table will not say, are you a Democrat? Are you a Republican? What kind of Democrat? What kind of Republican? They'll say, would you consider yourself kind of generally to the left, generally to the right, somewhere in the middle? And then we have a kind of wedding seating chart where we parcel people out so we know that we're getting ideologically diverse groups. And if we've done our job on the front end, those groups will be diverse in all of the other ways that reflect the community. We start right off the bat getting people to talk to each other. And I think this is a really critical foundation for the way that the workshop is going to go for the rest of these 3 hours. So we start, people know what the topic is, and we give a little introduction, and then we start people in a small group conversation about what their values are as they relate to this issue. And these values can be really broad. So this can be fairness, it can be competition, it can be freedom. What do you care about? Like, what's really beneath your policy positions on this issue? We then do about a 20-minute presentation on whatever the issue is. And again, this is not super in the weeds, but what we really want people to think about are what kinds of trade-offs might we need to make? If we spend money on this, it means we can't spend money on that. Or if we spend money on this and we still need to spend money on that, we have to increase taxes. So just start thinking about what are the gives and takes on this issue. And it really primes people to be thinking, not just what do I care about on this issue, but what does it mean for society if we implement the kind of policy that I'm thinking about? So people start to think that way. We have some workbooks where people are jotting down their thoughts on this issue. I think Steve mentioned it's kind of open to a lot of different learning styles, which is true. So it's tactical, there's reading and writing. You can just sit back and listen. So it's really meant for a lot of different kinds of brains. We then move into what I'll call the fish exercise, although we've done this with beach balls in Southern California and University of Rochester Yellow Jackets when we were in Rochester. This is a kind of yes and activity where the really common thing and sorry, I know I'm going over time, so I'll try to make this short. The really common thing that happens is I say, I think we should do this. And Katie says, oh no, that's a terrible idea. And it is now clear that this conversation is going nowhere. So what this exercise encourages you to do is find some kernel of what I have just said that you can latch onto and add to it. So instead of doing a no but, you're doing a yes and, which could just be, okay, yes, I agree with the value that is underlying that statement, and I would approach it this way. So again, we're not necessarily agreeing on everything, but we're finding where we have some commonalities. And then we will eventually move into that board game exercise where once people have been teasing these complexities out for a while, they will try to find consensus on at least a few different policies. And then we have a couple of follow-up things that are a surprise. So you'll have to come to one of these to see them.
Wonderful. I think that leaves us with a really good ending point. Hope you will all join me in thanking Jillian and Ibby, and of course our panelists, Tremaine, Steve, and Katie, for sharing both their time and expertise. And thank you to all of you who spent an hour out of your hard-won time with us. We appreciate you being here with us and learning from us. We will follow up with all kinds of details, including the recording, the slides, a number of the resources that Jillian mentioned, and we'll include contact information for ways that you can ask and have any questions that weren't answered, taken care of. We can set up one-on-one meetings if you're thinking about bringing this exercise to your community. We'd love to do that with you all. So be on the lookout for more information from us. And then additionally, just a quick plug for our future webinar series. We do these every month on a variety of different topics. So you will now be on our list, and would encourage you to join us next month where we're going to be featuring a program called United Against Hate Week. So feel free to join us for that. And thanks again for your time and for joining us this afternoon.